Trudy had exactly 3 rules for surviving contract work on alien stations. Keep your head down, finish your manifests on time, and never ever wander into sections marked under maintenance, which was why, naturally, she found herself doing exactly that on what had started as a perfectly unremarkable day. The thing about Kitar's haven was that it had been built by approximately 15 different species over the course of 2 centuries, and nobody, absolutely nobody, had bothered to keep the layout consistent. The result was a maze of corridors that looped back on themselves, dead-ended into what used to be docking bays, or occasionally just opened into empty space if you were particularly unlucky. Trudy had been coordinating freight transfers on the station for 6 months now, and she still got turned around at least twice a week. Today's detour was brought to you by the main market concourse, which had devolved into absolute chaos thanks to some kind of religious festival the Makuri were celebrating. Trudy had nothing against the Makuri. They were efficient, paid on time, and their cargo manifests were always accurate to the milligram. But when they celebrated, they really celebrated, and she had no desire to wade through a shoulder-to-shoulder crowd of 8-foot-tall feline aliens who could accidentally break her ribs with an enthusiastic greeting. So she'd ducked into a side passage that looked promising, followed it through 2 turns and down a ramp, and found herself in what appeared to be a storage section that hadn't seen traffic in months. The lighting was dim, half the panels cycling through that sickly yellow-green that meant they were running on backup power. Dust hung in the air, visible in the thin beams from overhead. Perfect. Quiet. Empty. And if she was reading the station schematics right, this should loop back around to the cargo administration wing in about 10 minutes. Should being the critical word. Trudy was halfway down the corridor when she heard it. A sound that made her stop dead in her tracks. High-pitched, desperate, chittering. The kind of noise that translated across species barriers as universal distress. "Oh, no," she muttered to nobody. "No, no, no. Not my problem. Not even remotely my problem." She took 2 steps forward. The sound came again, more frantic this time, joined by others. Multiple voices, young voices, layered with panic. Damn it! Trudy closed her eyes, counted to 5, and then did the stupid thing. She followed the sound. 3 turns later, she found them. The storage area had probably been meant for equipment at some point. Industrial shelving units lined the walls, most of them empty or holding ancient crates covered in dust, thick enough to write your name in. But what caught Trudy's attention, what made her breath catch in her throat, was the ceiling. Or rather, what used to be the ceiling. A support beam had cracked. No, not just cracked. It had split nearly in half, the metal, twisted and groaning under strain it was never meant to bear. The ceiling panels had buckled, sagging downward in a lazy curve that looked almost graceful until you realized it was seconds away from complete collapse. And underneath that failing structure, trapped in the narrow space between a fallen shelving unit and the wall, were 3 Makuri cubs. They couldn't have been more than 5 or 6 years old by Trudy's guess, though she was hardly an expert on Makuri development. They were small, well, small by Makuri standards, which still put them at about 4 feet tall, with the oversized paws and rounded faces that marked them as children. Their fur was puffed out in terror, making them look even younger, and they were pressed together in a tight cluster, chittering and mewling in obvious distress. One of them spotted Trudy and let out a sharp yip. All 3 heads swiveled toward her, 6 amber eyes wide with fear. "Okay," Trudy said, mostly to herself. "Okay, this is fine. This is absolutely fine." It was not fine. The beam groaned again, a sound like metal screaming, and the ceiling sagged another few inches. Dust and small debris rained down, The cubs flinched, pressing tighter together, and one of them, the smallest, with darker markings around its eyes, started to cry in earnest. Trudy's mind raced through her options. Find help? The nearest populated section was back through the market, at least 15 minutes round trip, and that beam didn't look like it had 15 seconds. Calm for emergency services? She slapped her wrist unit, already knowing what she'd find. No signal, because of course this forgotten corner of the station wouldn't have relay coverage, which left exactly one option, and it was monumentally stupid. Right, she said, shrugging out of her jacket and setting it carefully on the floor. Right, okay, we're doing this. We're actually doing this. She approached slowly, hands visible, keeping her body language as non-threatening as possible. The cubs watched her with that particular mix of hope and suspicion that seemed universal to frightened children everywhere. "Hey there," Trudy said softly, even though she knew they probably couldn't understand a word. "I know I look weird, and I know you're scared, but we need to get you out of here before this whole place comes down on your heads, okay?" The beam groaned again, louder this time. A chunk of ceiling panel broke free and crashed to the floor not 3 feet from where Trudy stood. She didn't flinch, or rather, she flinched internally while keeping her face calm, which was basically the same thing. "Yeah, that's not ominous at all," she muttered. The space where the cubs were trapped was narrow, barely wide enough for Trudy to squeeze through, and she had to drop to her hands and knees to fit under the sagging ceiling. The metal was cold against her palms, the floor gritty with debris. Every instinct she had was screaming at her to get out, to run, to save herself. She kept crawling forward. The cubs chittered at her, a rapid-fire exchange that sounded almost like questions. The 2 larger ones had positioned themselves protectively in front of the smallest, their tiny claws extended in a defensive posture that would have been adorable if it wasn't so heartbreaking. "I'm not going to hurt you," Trudy said, stopping just outside their reach. "I'm here to help. Do you understand? Help?" She mimed pulling them toward the exit, exaggerating her movements. The cubs watched, their heads tilting in that distinctly feline way. Then the smallest one, the one with the dark markings, did something that surprised her. It reached out one small paw and touched her hand. The contact was feather-light, tentative, but it was enough. Trudy felt something in her chest crack open, some stupid, soft part of her that she'd spent years trying to bury under layers of cynicism and self-preservation. "Yeah," she whispered. "Yeah, okay. Let's get you kids out of here." She reached for the nearest cub, one of the larger ones, and gently, so gently, pulled it toward her. It resisted for a moment, then seemed to understand, scrambling forward on uncertain legs. Trudy guided it past her, back toward the entrance to the space, giving it a gentle push in the right direction. "Go!" she said, pointing. "Go! Get out! Run!" The cub hesitated, looking back at its companions, but another ominous creak from above made the decision for it. It bolted, surprisingly fast, disappearing around the corner. 1 down, 2 to go. The second cub came more easily, having watched its sibling survive the process. Trudy pulled it close, felt its rapid heartbeat against her palms, and sent it scrambling after the first, which left the smallest one, still pressed against the wall, its amber eyes locked on Trudy's face. "Come on, sweetheart," Trudy coaxed, extending her hand. "Your turn. Let's—" The beam snapped. Not broke, not cracked further. Snapped clean through with a sound like a gunshot. The ceiling dropped 6 inches in an instant, and Trudy had exactly enough time to register what was happening before physics took over. She lunged forward, her only thought to get her body between the falling debris and the cub. Her arms wrapped around the small Makuri, pulling it against her chest as she twisted, putting her back to the ceiling. The world became noise and pain and crushing weight. Something hit her hard across the shoulders. A panel, maybe, or part of the beam. Her ribs screamed in protest as more debris piled on top, driving the air from her lungs. She tasted blood and dust and realized distantly that she'd bitten her tongue. But the cub was alive. She could feel it moving against her chest, could feel its small claws digging into her shirt as it clung to her. Got you, she thought, or maybe said. She wasn't sure anymore. Got you. You're safe. I got you. Something heavy crashed down on her head, and the world went dark. The last thing Trudy registered, before consciousness slipped away entirely, was a small, warm weight pressed against her heart, and the faint sound of running footsteps that might have been help, or might have been her imagination, or might have been the last thing she'd ever hear. At least the kid made it, she thought. Then, nothing. Nothing at all. The first thing Trudy became aware of was the smell. Not bad, exactly, but deeply unfamiliar. Something like warm stone and dried herbs with an underlying musk that her brain couldn't quite categorize. It wasn't the antiseptic sting of a human medical facility, and it definitely wasn't the recycled air of her cramped station quarters. The second thing she became aware of was the pain. "Oh," she tried to say, but it came out as more of a wheeze. "Oh, that's not good." Her ribs felt like someone had used them for percussion practice. Her head throbbed with a deep, nauseating ache that pulsed in time with her heartbeat. And her back. Her back felt like it had lost an argument with a cargo hauler and then been dragged through a fusion reactor for good measure. "Ah, you wake." The voice was deep, rumbling, with an accent that turned the words into something almost melodic. "This is fortunate. Much longer," and Oxmoth was considering more aggressive intervention. Trudy forced her eyes open, immediately regretted it as light stabbed into her skull, then tried again more slowly. The room was, well, calling it a room was generous. It was more like a grotto, all smooth, curved walls in shades of amber and ochre, with bioluminescent strips running along the ceiling that pulsed with a gentle, organic rhythm. The bed, and she was definitely in a bed, though it was more of a heated stone platform covered in what felt like incredibly soft fur, was positioned in the center, surrounded by equipment that looked both highly advanced and completely alien to her understanding of medicine. And standing next to her, holding what appeared to be a medical scanner crossed with a wind chime, was a Makuri. Not just any Makuri. This one was old, his muzzle grizzled with silver-white fur, his amber eyes clouded slightly with age, but sharp with intelligence. He wore what looked like ceremonial robes in deep crimson, decorated with intricate patterns that might have been writing or might have been purely decorative. "Oxmoth," Trudy managed, her voice rough. "That's you?" "Indeed." He set the scanner chime thing aside and leaned closer, studying her face with an intensity that was slightly unnerving. "I am Oxmoth, healer of Clan Exhala, and you are Trudy, human, foolish savior of cubs, breaker of natural law." "That's a lot of titles," Trudy said, then immediately started coughing. Her ribs made their displeasure known, and she clutched at her side with a gasp. Oxmoth made a clicking sound that might have been disapproval and pressed something cold against her neck. Instantly, the pain receded to a dull roar. Manageable, if not exactly pleasant. "You should not speak much yet," he said. "Your injuries were substantial. 3 broken ribs, concussion of moderate severity, lacerations across your back and shoulders, internal bruising. You are fortunate that Makuri physiology and human physiology are similar enough that our healing techniques translate. Mostly. How long? Trudy asked, ignoring his advice about not speaking. 3 planetary rotations, approximately 60 of your hours. Oxmoth returned to his equipment, making adjustments that caused the bioluminescent strips to pulse in a different rhythm. The cubs found help quickly. Huxkan himself carried you from the collapse. This likely saved your life. A human medical facility would have been too far. Trudy's mind was still fuzzy, thoughts moving through molasses, but something in his words caught her attention. The cubs, are they? Alive and well, thanks to your intervention. Oxmoth's tail flicked in what might have been amusement. In fact, they have been quite insistent about visiting. The youngest one, Fen, has attempted to breach medical protocols no fewer than 18 times. Most determined cub I have witnessed in many seasons. Fen, Trudy repeated, and suddenly she could feel it again. That small, warm weight against her chest, tiny claws digging into her shirt. The little one with the dark markings? The same. Oxmoth turned to face her fully, and his expression shifted into something she couldn't quite read. You understand what you have done, yes? The significance. I pulled some kids out of a collapsing room, Trudy said slowly. Pretty sure that's just basic decency. The look Oxmoth gave her was equal parts confusion, and something that might have been wonder. Your species is strange beyond measure. Yeah, we get that a lot. Oxmoth settled onto a low stool that brought him closer to her eye level, his movements deliberate and almost ceremonial. Listen carefully, Trudy human. What you have done is not... He paused, seeming to search for words. Not normal. Not expected. Not comprehensible by Makuri standards. I'm listening, Trudy said, though honestly she was fighting to keep her eyes open. Whatever he'd given her for the pain was making her pleasantly floaty. The cubs you saved belong to Clan Exhala, one of the 3 most powerful family groups on this station, with influence spanning 8 systems. He held up a clawed hand, ticking off points. The largest cub, Pixhun, is nephew to our master trader. The second, Loxmi, is cousin to our fleet commander. And Fen, his voice softened slightly. Fen is grandson to Matriarch Oxel Limma herself, direct line, future leader, if he survives to adulthood. Okay, Trudy said carefully. So they're important. That's good? That I saved important kids? You are not understanding. Oxmoth leaned forward, his intensity ratcheting up. In Makuri culture, we value strength above all else. Strength of body, strength of will, strength of purpose. The weak are protected by their clan, yes, but outsiders? Outsiders are assessed, categorized, kept at distance. We do not trust easily. We do not honor freely. Right. I've noticed you guys aren't exactly the galaxy's most welcoming. And you, Oxmoth interrupted, are weak by our standards. Small, fragile, possessed of no natural weapons, no enhanced senses. Your species is tolerated because you are useful for trade, but respected? No, not generally. Trudy felt a spark of irritation cut through the pain medication haze. Gee, thanks for the pep talk. Really feeling the healing vibes here. But Oxmoth wasn't done. What you did, choosing to enter danger, choosing to place yourself between death and cubs that were not your own, cubs of a species that has shown you no particular regard, this breaks our understanding of behavior. This is not weakness. This is something else entirely. He stood, pacing now, his robes swishing around his legs. In our most ancient traditions, there is a concept, Kaith. It translates poorly to human language, but the closest meaning is soul guardian bond. It occurs when one being chooses another's life over their own, not from duty or obligation or clan loyalty, but from, he gestured, frustrated, from something deeper, something that transcends species, transcends reason. I didn't choose anything that deep, Trudy protested. I just saw kids in trouble and couldn't walk away. That's it. That's all it was. That is all it was, Oxmoth repeated, and now he was definitely amused. Yes, precisely. And this is why the Matriarch has convened the clan. This is why Huxkan stands guard outside this chamber. This is why you will wake tomorrow to a reality you cannot yet imagine. Trudy tried to sit up, immediately regretted it, as her ribs screamed, and settled for glaring at him from her prone position. What does that mean? What's happening tomorrow? You will see, Oxmoth said, moving back to his equipment. For now, you rest. Heal. Prepare yourself. Prepare myself for what? For honor you did not seek. For recognition you do not want. For the gratitude of a people who do not give it lightly. He glanced back at her, his amber eyes gleaming in the bioluminescent light. The clan is preparing something truly human, something that has not been done in living memory. That's deeply ominous and not at all reassuring, Trudy muttered, but she was already losing the fight against exhaustion. Her eyelids felt like they had weights attached. Sleep, Oxmoth said, his voice gentling. You are safe here, safer perhaps than anywhere else in known space. Clan Exhala does not forget debts, especially not blood debts. Still ominous, Trudy mumbled, but darkness was already pulling her down. Just before she slipped under, she could have sworn she heard small voices outside the chamber, young, insistent, definitely belonging to cubs, and Oxmoth's rumbling response as he moved to intercept them. Then sleep claimed her, deep and mercifully dreamless. When Trudy woke again, the pain had receded to a manageable ache, and her head felt clearer, though still not entirely her own. The chamber was dimmer now, the bioluminescent strips pulsing in a slower night cycle rhythm. And standing at the entrance, silhouetted against the corridor light beyond, was the largest Makuri she had ever seen. He had to be close to 9 feet tall, his shoulders so broad they nearly filled the doorway. His fur was midnight black with silver streaks, his muzzle scarred in ways that spoke of serious combat experience. He wore armor, actual armor, not ceremonial robes, and carried himself with the kind of absolute confidence that came from knowing you were the most dangerous thing in any given room. You are awake, he said, his voice a bass rumble that Trudy felt in her bones. Good. The Matriarch wishes to see you. And you are? Trudy asked, though she had a pretty good guess. Huxkan, first shield of Matriarch Oxel Limma, guardian of Clan Exhala. He stepped into the chamber, and Trudy realized with a start that he was moving with extreme care, like he was afraid of breaking something. I am also the one who pulled you from the collapse. Oxmoth is correct. Any longer? And you would have died. Then I guess I owe you thanks, Trudy said. Huxkan's ears flattened slightly. Surprise, maybe? You owe me nothing. The debt is entirely the other direction. I really just did what anyone would do, Huxkan finished, and there was something odd in his tone. Yes, Oxmoth mentioned you believe this. The Matriarch will find it illuminating. He moved to the side of her sleeping platform, and Trudy realized he was holding something, a bundle of fabric in deep blue, folded with precise care. These are guest garments, he explained. traditional for one honored by the clan. They will— He paused, eyeing her smaller frame with what might have been concern. They will fit poorly, as they were made for Makuri proportions, but refusing them would be unwise. When you say unwise, you mean— I mean, the matriarch has gathered the entire clan. Every member currently on the station, plus many who have traveled from nearby systems specifically for this occasion. Huxkan set the garments down carefully. Refusing to attend would be interpreted as grave insult. Refusing to wear traditional garments would be interpreted as rejection of our culture. And while I believe Oxel Limma would forgive such insults from one who saved her grandson, not all members of the clan would be so understanding. Her grandson, Trudy repeated slowly. Fen is the matriarch's grandson. Direct line, Huxkan confirmed, and you put yourself between him and death without hesitation, without even knowing his significance. This is— He stopped, seemed to gather himself. Oxmoth should have explained, Kaith. He tried. I'm still not sure I get it. You will, Huxkan said simply. Can you stand? Trudy tested her limbs carefully, found them responsive if sore, and managed to lever herself upright, with only 2 or 3 muffled curses. Her back twinged, her ribs protested, but she could move. I can stand, she confirmed. Then you have 1 rotation of this station to prepare yourself, Huxkan said, moving toward the exit. The ceremony will begin at the next cycle peak. I will return to escort you. Wait, what ceremony? What exactly is— But Huxkan was already gone, his massive form disappearing down the corridor with surprising stealth. Trudy stood alone in the healing chamber, holding traditional Makuri guest garments that would absolutely swallow her whole, trying to process the fact that she was apparently about to attend some kind of clan gathering for saving 3 cubs she'd never met before 3 days ago. This is fine, she told the empty room. This is totally fine. Just a casual meeting with alien warrior cats who apparently have a whole complicated honor system I don't understand. What could possibly go wrong? The bioluminescent strips pulsed in their steady rhythm, offering no answers. Trudy looked down at the blue garments, then at her own battered body, and sighed. Right, she muttered. Guess I'd better figure out how to put these on without passing out. That seems like a reasonable first step. It was, she reflected, going to be a very long day. The garments fit exactly as terribly as Huxkan had predicted. Trudy stood in front of the polished metal surface that served as a mirror, trying to figure out if she looked more like a child playing dress-up in her parents' clothes or a very confused refugee from a particularly unsuccessful costume party. The blue fabric, some kind of woven material that felt like silk but had the structural integrity of canvas, hung off her shoulders in folds clearly designed for someone twice her size. The waist portion, which should have cinched somewhere around her midsection, dangled near her knees. She'd had to improvise a belt from one of the decorative sashes just to keep the whole thing from falling off entirely. Dignity, she told her reflection. You look absolutely dignified, and not at all like you're drowning in fancy curtains. Her reflection disagreed, but there wasn't much to be done about it. The door chimed, a melodic sound that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves, and Huxkan entered without waiting for acknowledgement. He took one look at her, and his ears flicked in what Trudy was beginning to recognize as suppressed amusement. Not one word, she warned. I would not dare, Huxkan said, his tone absolutely deadpan. You look very traditional. I look like I raided a theater's storage closet. That too. He moved closer, studying her with a critical eye, then reached out and adjusted the draping of fabric across her shoulders. His claws were careful, precise, never quite touching her skin. There, better. Still wrong, but better. Your confidence is inspiring, Trudy muttered, but she checked the mirror again. He was right. It did look marginally less absurd. The clan will not judge you for the fit, Huxkan said, stepping back. They will judge you for wearing it at all. That you make the attempt is what matters. Good, because this is about as good as it's getting. Trudy turned to face him fully, ignoring the way her ribs twinged in protest. So, are you going to tell me what I'm walking into, or are we maintaining the ominous mystery right up until the moment I embarrass myself? Huxkan's expression shifted, became something more serious. What you walk into is honor, respect, gratitude beyond measure. The matriarch has invoked the old customs, the traditional forms. What happens in the hall of Exhala tonight has not occurred in my lifetime, and I have lived many seasons. That's still pretty vague. You will see soon enough. He gestured toward the corridor. Come, it is time. The walk through the station's Makuri sector was unlike anything Trudy had experienced in her 6 months of contract work. Usually, she moved through these areas with purposeful efficiency, exchanging nods with traders, stepping aside for the larger traffic, generally being ignored as just another transient worker. Not today. Today, every Makuri they passed stopped what they were doing. Some bowed their heads, others touched their chest with one clawed hand in what was clearly a gesture of respect. A group of traders loading cargo actually ceased work entirely, turning to watch her pass with expressions that ranged from curiosity to something that looked almost like reverence. This is deeply uncomfortable, Trudy said quietly. Grow accustomed to it, Huxkan replied. After tonight, it will only intensify. That's not reassuring. It is not meant to be reassuring. It is meant to be truthful. They turned down a corridor Trudy had never seen before, wider than the standard passages, with walls carved in intricate patterns that seemed to tell stories. The lighting here was different too, warmer, more like natural sunlight, and space to create pools of illumination and shadow that gave the whole space a ceremonial quality. At the end of the corridor stood a massive door. No, calling it a door was like calling a starship a vehicle. It was a barrier of dark metal inlaid with what looked like precious stones, easily 20 feet tall and wide enough to drive a cargo hauler through. Ancient symbols were etched into its surface, their meaning lost to Trudy, but clearly significant. 2 guards stood at attention on either side, both nearly as large as Huxkan, both armed with ceremonial weapons that probably weren't just for show. They snapped to attention as Huxkan approached, their fists striking their chests in perfect synchronization. First shield, one of them said. The clan is assembled. The matriarch awaits. Then we shall not keep her waiting. Huxkan glanced at Trudy. Once we enter, you will be escorted to the center of the hall. Stand where you are placed. Speak only if directly addressed by the matriarch. Do not attempt to leave until given permission. Understand? Stand still. Shut up. Wait for dismissal, Trudy summarized. Got it. I would phrase it with more grace, but yes, essentially. Huxkan turned back to the guards. Open the Hall of Exhala. The doors swung inward with a deep, resonant sound that Trudy felt in her chest. Beyond them lay something that stole the breath from her lungs. The hall was enormous, easily the size of a commercial hangar, with a vaulted ceiling that soared into shadows above. The walls were lined with banners in deep crimsons and golds, each marked with symbols that Trudy assumed were clan designations. Weapons, ancient, ceremonial, and probably still perfectly functional, were displayed in careful arrangements between the banners. And along the walls, on tiered platforms that rose like amphitheater seating, stood Makuri. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands. Trudy couldn't get an accurate count because they seemed to fill every available space, a sea of fur in shades ranging from pure white to midnight black, all wearing various forms of traditional dress. The younger ones stood in the back, the adults in the middle tiers, and in the front, closest to the central floor, were the elders, grizzled, scarred, radiating authority. And in the very center of the hall, seated on a raised platform of carved stone, was the Matriarch. Oxel Limma was ancient. That was Trudy's first thought. Not old, ancient. Her fur had gone almost entirely silver-white, and her body, while still clearly powerful, carried the weight of years in every deliberate movement. But her eyes were sharp as broken glass, amber and gold, and when they fixed on Trudy, it felt like being seen all the way down to her soul. "Come forward, Trudy human," Oxel Limma said, her voice carrying across the hall without effort. "Come, stand before Clan Exhala." Trudy's feet moved before her brain fully engaged, carrying her down the central aisle. The silence was absolute. Not even the rustle of fabric or the whisper of breath disturbed it. Every eye in the hall was on her, tracking her progress. She stopped where Hux Khan had positioned her, about 10 feet from the matriarch's platform. This close, she could see the 3 cubs sitting at Oxel Limma's feet, Pix Hun and Loxmi flanking the smaller Fen, who was practically vibrating with barely contained energy. "Do you know why you are here?" Oxel Limma asked. "To be honored, I'm told," Trudy said, then added, "Though honestly, I'm still not entirely sure why." A ripple of sound moved through the assembly. Not quite laughter, but something close to it. Oxel Limma's whiskers twitched. "You saved 3 cubs of my clan from certain death," the matriarch said. "You placed your body between them and falling stone. You chose their lives over your own, knowing nothing of who they were, what they might mean to our people. You acted without thought of reward or recognition. This is what you did." "They were kids," Trudy said simply. "What else would I do?" The ripple became a wave, whispers moving through the crowd like wind through trees. Oxel Limma raised one clawed hand, and silence fell instantly. "What else would you do?" she repeated slowly, as if tasting the words. As if the answer were obvious. As if any being would make the same choice. She leaned forward slightly. "Tell me, Trudy human, in your culture, is this common? Do your people routinely risk death for strangers?" Trudy thought about that. "I mean, we try to. We don't always succeed, and plenty of people probably wouldn't have done what I did, but yeah, helping people in danger is kind of a basic expectation, especially kids." "Especially young ones," Oxel Limma murmured. "Yes, this aligns with what we have learned of your species." "Curious." She stood, and the movement was slow, deliberate, ceremonial. Every Makuri in the hall straightened to attention. "In our most ancient traditions," Oxel Limma said, her voice carrying to every corner of the massive space, "there exists a concept called Kaith, the soul guardian bond. It is invoked when one being chooses another's survival over their own, driven not by obligation, but by something deeper, by compassion that transcends clan, transcends species, transcends reason itself." She descended from her platform, moving with the careful dignity of age and authority. Trudy suddenly found herself fighting the urge to step back, to bow, to do something that acknowledged the sheer presence radiating from this ancient warrior. "You have invoked Kaith, Trudy human. Whether you understand our ways or not, whether you accept our traditions or not. This bond now exists. You are guardian to cubs of Exhala. You are protector, recognized by our oldest laws. Oxel Limma stopped directly in front of Trudy, close enough that Trudy had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. "And so I name you clan friend," the matriarch said, her voice ringing out clear and strong. "I grant you protection of Exhala across all territories where our influence extends. I declare that any who harm you harm the clan itself, and will face our justice accordingly." She reached up and removed something from around her neck, a pendant of carved stone on a thick chain, ancient and obviously precious. "This is Kethmar," Oxel Limma said, holding it out. "Clan token, proof of bond. Wear it, and all Makuri will know you are under our protection." Trudy took the pendant with trembling hands. It was heavier than it looked, warm from contact with Oxel Limma's fur, carved with intricate symbols that probably held meanings she'd spend years learning. "I don't know what to say," she admitted. "Then say nothing," Oxel Limma replied. "Words are not what we require." And then, shockingly, impossibly, the matriarch knelt. Not a slight bow, not a nod of respect. She knelt fully, one knee to the ground, her head lowered, in a position of absolute submission. For a heartbeat, the hall remained frozen in silence. Then, like a wave crashing against shore, every single Makuri in the hall followed suit. Hundreds of warriors, traders, elders, and cubs, an entire clan, kneeling before one small, battered human who'd simply refused to walk past children in danger. Trudy felt tears streaming down her face before she even realized she was crying. The feast that followed was chaos of the most overwhelming kind. Trudy had been ushered, gently but firmly, to a place of honor at the matriarch's table, sandwiched between Oxel Limma herself and Huxkan, with the three cubs practically climbing over each other for space near her feet. The hall had transformed from solemn ceremony to raucous celebration in the span of minutes, and Trudy was struggling to process any of it. "You must eat," Oxel Limma said, nudging a plate toward her. "Traditional feast foods. Great honor." Trudy looked down at the plate and tried very hard not to let her expression betray her thoughts. The food appeared to be some kind of raw meat, very raw, possibly still moving, garnished with what looked like herbs but smelled like feet. "It's lovely," she managed. Huxkan made a sound that was definitely a laugh. "You are terrible liar, Trudy human, but the attempt is appreciated." "I can try it," Trudy said, because she'd already gotten this far into cultural diplomacy, and backing out now seemed rude. She picked up the smallest piece, closed her eyes, and took a bite. It was actually not as bad as she'd feared. Gamey, chewy, with a spicy aftertaste that made her sinuses clear instantly. She swallowed, opened her eyes, and found half the table watching her expectantly. "Good," she said, only slightly lying. "Very flavorful." This pronouncement was met with approving rumbles, and suddenly her plate was being loaded with at least 6 different varieties of things she couldn't identify. Trudy resigned herself to a night of interesting digestive consequences, and gamely tried a bit of everything. Fen, who had been uncharacteristically quiet up until now, suddenly climbed directly into her lap. "Ah," Trudy said eloquently. "He likes you," Oxel Limma observed, her tone amused. "He has not stopped speaking of you since the collapse. Trudy, who fell, he calls you. Trudy, who stayed." The cub chirped something up at her, his amber eyes wide and earnest. Trudy didn't need a translation device to understand the tone. Pure, uncomplicated affection. "Hey there, troublemaker," she said softly, adjusting her position so he could settle more comfortably. "You doing okay? No nightmares about falling ceilings?" Fen chittered again, then, to Trudy's complete shock, pressed his small forehead against her collarbone in what was clearly a gesture of trust. "He says, you smell wrong, but feel right," Huxcan translated, his voice oddly gentle. "He says he was afraid, and then you came, and then he was not afraid anymore." Trudy's vision blurred again. "Well, that's just... Yeah. I'm glad you're okay, kid." The feast continued around them, warriors sharing increasingly elaborate battle stories, elders debating clan politics in rumbling voices, younger Makuri challenging each other to tests of strength. And through it all, Trudy sat at the center, this small human who'd accidentally become legend. At one point, a massive warrior, even larger than Huxcan, with scars crisscrossing his muzzle, approached the table and bowed low to Trudy. "I am Cox, then," he said, his voice like grinding stone. "Master of arms for Clan Exhala. I must ask, why did you do this thing? You knew you would likely die. Why risk everything for cubs not your own?" The hall quieted, conversations fading as others leaned in to hear her answer. Trudy looked down at Fen, still curled in her lap, then back up at Cooksadhen. "They were kids," she said simply. "What else would I do? Let them die because we're different species? Because I didn't know them? Because saving them was dangerous?" She shook her head. "That's not how it works. That's not how any of this should work." Cooksadhen stared at her for a long moment, then turned to address the hall. "You hear this? This is not bravado, not posturing. She genuinely does not understand why we find her actions remarkable." He turned back to Trudy, and there was something like wonder in his expression. "Your species is either the most foolish in the galaxy or the most noble, perhaps both." "We're definitely foolish," Trudy agreed. "The noble part is still up for debate." The laughter that followed was warm, inclusive, and Trudy felt something shift in the atmosphere, acceptance moving from formal recognition to genuine fondness. The days that followed blurred together in a cascade of unexpected changes. Trudy returned to her freight coordination work, but nothing was the same. Makuri traders who'd previously been cordial but distant now greeted her by name, offered her tea, asked about her health with genuine concern. Her cargo manifests were processed with lightning speed. Disputes that would normally take days to resolve were settled in minutes. Other species on the station noticed. Trudy caught confused stares from human colleagues, suspicious glances from the insectoid Thex merchants, outright bewilderment from the crystalline Praith traders. The station administrator, a perpetually stressed Glibian named Pox, called her into his office to ask what exactly she'd done to earn Makuri favor, and seemed genuinely stunned when she explained. "You saved some cubs," he repeated slowly. "Yes. And now the most powerful clan on the station treats you like royalty." "Apparently." Pox leaned back in his chair, his gill slits fluttering in agitation. "Humans," he muttered, "always complicating things." The cubs visited regularly. Fen especially seemed to have adopted Trudy as his personal hero, bringing her drawings, surprisingly good ones, of the day she'd saved them. One showed a tiny figure in blue standing between 3 cubs and a massive falling ceiling, and Trudy had to excuse herself to cry in a storage closet for 5 minutes after seeing it. Oxmoth stopped by periodically to check her healing progress, though these visits increasingly felt more social than medical. He taught her basic Makuri phrases, laughed at her terrible pronunciation, shared stories of clan history that stretched back centuries. And Huxcan, stoic, dangerous Huxcan, somehow became something like a friend. He'd appear outside her quarters in the mornings, claiming he was passing by on patrol, and walk with her to the cargo administration wing. They didn't always talk, but the companionship was comfortable, easy. One evening, about 2 months after the ceremony, Trudy was reviewing shipping schedules when her door chimed. She opened it to find Oxel Limma herself standing in the corridor, looking vaguely uncomfortable in the human-scaled space. "Matriarch," Trudy said, surprised. "I wasn't expecting. Come in, please." Oxel Limma ducked through the doorway, her ears brushing the ceiling. "I cannot stay long, but I wish to speak with you privately." "Of course. Is everything okay?" "More than okay." Oxel Limma settled carefully onto the floor, since none of Trudy's furniture would support her weight. "I wanted you to know that what you did, it has spread. Other clans have heard. Other Makuri across multiple systems now speak of the human who invoked Kaith. Is that good?" "It is unprecedented," Oxel Limma said. "You have changed how my people view yours. Not universally, not yet. But seeds have been planted. Understanding grows where before there was only tolerance." Trudy sat down opposite her, cross-legged on the floor. "I just saw kids in trouble." "Yes," Oxel Limma said softly. "And that simplicity is what makes it profound. You did not calculate political advantage. You did not weigh cost versus benefit. You simply chose compassion over safety, love over logic." She reached out one massive paw and carefully, gently, touched Trudy's shoulder. "This is a gift my people have forgotten how to give freely. You reminded us." "I don't know what to say to that." "Then say nothing. Simply know that you are valued, that you are seen, that your choice mattered far beyond 3 small lives saved." 3 months later, Trudy stood at the docking bay, her contract complete, preparing to board transport to her next assignment. She'd said her goodbyes to Oxmoth, to the cubs, to the dozens of Makuri who'd somehow become part of her daily life. Huxkan was the last, standing at attention, but with his ears tilted in obvious sadness. "You will return?" he asked. "Someday, maybe. The galaxy's big, but I seem to keep ending up in the same places eventually. When you do, Clan Exhala will welcome you, always." He raised his fist in salute. Trudy returned it, then surprised them both by stepping forward and hugging him, or trying to, given the size difference. She basically hugged his leg. Huxkan froze for a moment, then carefully lowered one massive paw to rest on her head. "Safe travels, Trudy who stayed," he said quietly. "May the stars guide you home." As the transport lifted away from the station, Trudy looked back at Kitar's haven, at the massive structure that had been home for 6 months. She touched the Kethmar hanging around her neck, feeling its reassuring weight. She'd come to the station as a freight coordinator and left as something else entirely. A friend, a guardian, a bridge between species who'd barely understood each other. All because she'd refused to walk past 3 terrified children when the ceiling was falling. Sometimes, Trudy reflected, as the station dwindled into starlight, doing what feels right is enough. Even if an entire clan ends up bowing because of it. Even if you never asked for legend status. Even if all you did was choose compassion when the world was crumbling around you. Sometimes, that's not just enough. Sometimes, that's everything.